for both Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats will send 14 delegates to the National Convention. The Republicans will send 19. Florida will hold a primary. 148 delegate seats will be chosen by Florida Democrats. 97 seats will be chosen by Republicans. Democrats and Republicans of Hawaii will hold a caucus. Democrats will send 20 delegates to the National Convention. Republicans will send 14. Louisiana will hold a primary in which Democrats will select 60 convention delegates. Louisiana Republicans will vote on 38. In the Massachusetts primary, Democrats of the Bay State will vote on 94 delegates to the Democratic National Convention. The Republican Party will choose 38 delegates to attend its convention. Mississippi will hold a primary in which Democrats will vote on 39 delegates. Republicans will select 33. Missouri residents will vote in a caucus. 77 delegates will represent the Democrats at the National Convention. 47 delegates will represent the Republicans. A primary will be held in Oklahoma. Democrats will vote on 45 delegates to the National Convention. The Republicans will choose 34. Residents of Rhode Island will vote in a primary. Democrats will be voting on 22 delegate seats, the Republicans 15. A primary will also be held in Tennessee. 68 delegates will be chosen by the Democrats, 45 by Tennessee Republicans. Texas Democrats will choose their delegates through both a primary and a caucus. Republicans of the Lone Star State will hold a primary. The Democrats will send 196 delegates to the National Convention. Republicans will send 121. This weekend, voters in Florida are gearing up for Tuesday's presidential primary, and the candidates have been crisscrossing the Sunshine State, expressing their views on a variety of issues. On the Democratic side, leading White House hopefuls gathered earlier today in Miami and took part in a forum concerning health care in America. Former California Governor Jerry Brown, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, and former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas are hoping to pick up some of the 148 pledged party delegates. Coming next on C-SPAN, it's coverage of this health care forum moderated by West Virginia's Democratic Senator Jay Rockefeller.
Radisson Mart Hotel. This is Decision 92, a presidential debate. Sponsored by Channel 4, the Miami Herald, the National Health Policy Council, and the University of Miami School of Medicine.
Good evening. I'm Jay Rockefeller, and I'm the moderator for the forum tonight. Despite any individual differences that the three candidates here may have on health care, they're all totally committed to comprehensive health care reform. And they want to see the cities and the states get out from underneath the unbelievable burden that's taking place now because of the cost of health care, and the same thing with families. It's just crushing families. And they're very interested in long-term care. Frankly, I'm very proud that as a Democrat, that the candidates from my party is producing candidates who are all committed to comprehensive, not just piecemeal, but comprehensive health care reform. Now, before I introduce the participants, I'd like to state for the record that all of the major candidates, and by that I mean everybody eligible for matching funds, were invited to this forum. That includes President Bush and Patrick Buchanan. Please welcome these three Democratic candidates for presidency. Thank you. Former Governor Jerry Brown has spent more than 20 years in public service. He started out as a member of the Los Angeles Community College Board of Trustees, was governor of California, as you know, and has run for the presidency in 1976 and 1980. He has committed his campaign to bringing the American people further into this process of the political process. And he resigned earlier this year his position as chair of the Democratic Party in order to run for the presidency. Governor Jerry Brown. Okay. Governor Bill Clinton is only the second person in Arkansas's history to be elected to 5 terms as governor. Last year, his fellow governors ranked Bill Clinton as the single most effective governor among all of them. As a governor, he's had to grapple now for many years with the problems of the skyrocketing costs of health care in terms of the state level. Please welcome Governor Bill Clinton. Thank you. Former Senator Paul Tsongas, an outstanding member of the Massachusetts delegation in the United States Senate before he resigned in 1984 to successfully battle against cancer, has based his candidacy on an extraordinarily detailed grasp of the issues. His declaration of candidacy began with an 80-page economic challenge to America. Please welcome Senator Paul Tsongas. Thank you. In addition to the candidates, we have 3 distinguished people asking questions today. Nick Bogert of WTVJ in Miami, Tom Fiedler, who's the political editor of the Miami Herald, and Dr. Stuart Altman of the National Healthcare Policy Council. Before we begin, I'd like to outline the rules for tonight's debate. Tonight's debate will focus exclusively on the issues of health care. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes as an opening statement. Then, following a short video, each of the 3 questioners in turn will have 9 minutes in which to ask the candidates questions. And then each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to those questions. At the end of the forum, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. We'll have our first opening statement from Governor Bill Clinton.
Thank you very much. For the last 15 years, I have been in and briefly out of public life in a state with a very high percentage of elderly people, a large number of poor children, a significant number of people without health insurance, and many people who live in rural areas where they don't have access to health care. I have struggled since 1977 with the problems of long-term care and coverage and care for children. I've worked in my state to lower the infant mortality rate dramatically and to improve the range of services to all people in the health care network, especially to our elderly, through programs like our Elder Choices program, giving people who access Medicaid the right to avoid nursing homes and to take charge of their own lives through home health care and personal care and things of that kind. I'm convinced that none of us will ever be successful until we have a national system of health care that controls costs, covers everyone, deals with long-term care, emphasizes education and prevention, and also provides access to people in remote rural areas and in inner cities. I think we have to begin with cost controls because everybody says there's at least $100 billion of waste in this system. And I've outlined a detailed plan to take on the waste in the health insurance bureaucracies, the health care bureaucracy itself, which is growing so dramatically, the way the government regulates health care, and instead to focus on a new system which will provide coverage and control cost.
Senator Paul Tsongas.
Thank you. As Senator Rockefeller pointed out, that I've had my own struggle with health care. 3,079 days ago, I discovered a lump turned out to be cancer. I'm still here. And I'm still here because of the quality of health care in this country. So I feel very strongly about this issue. This is not, to me, a memorandum. This is not something handed to me by my staff. I have lived this issue. And I feel particularly strongly that every American should have the same access to health care that I had. And that's a basic commitment. During this discussion, I'm going to go into my health care plan, which I think you all have a copy of. But I'd like to make 2 points before we get into that. First is that Senator Rockefeller and Senator Bob Kerrey have led the fight in the Senate in recent years to bring health care on the national agenda. I think all of us applaud the work that has been done. And next year, because of the work you've done, you're going to see some action. The second point I would make, it's no accident that George Bush and Pat Buchanan aren't here. Because what they have put forth is not health care. It is a gimmick, the tax credit gimmick. So let me use this forum, and I think I speak for all of us, to President Bush and Pat Buchanan, come with us to a health care forum and let's debate your health care plan, because if we can do that, I think we can express the absurdity and the cynicism of what they have put forth.
Governor Brown.
I see health care in the larger context of where we are in America. The failure to achieve real social and economic justice is also reflected in our health care policy, with 40 million people not covered and millions more not able to attain the kind of coverage they really need. To overcome this, we're going to have to do something very different. Something so different that President Truman failed when he proposed national health insurance, Senator Kennedy has failed, and every mention in the Democratic platform and others to call for this health care system. It hasn't happened because of the imbalance of the power of the few who, through their political action committees, can keep the status quo continuing. I think the first insight we have to understand is we have to overcome that. When we do, I believe the only healthcare system that makes any sense is a single-payer system similar to what has been adopted in Canada, where everyone would be in one universal system, but maintaining the right of private physicians and private hospitals and private choice, emphasizing a respect for a diversity of healing practices, emphasizing prevention and wellness and occupational and environmental health. But I don't see any way, after having worked on this problem in the largest state in the Union, which after all has the highest medical costs, to really contain costs without establishing a single payer for all basic services. Once we can establish that in this country, then we will have the funding to cover the 40 million who are not now covered. And that will only occur as we deepen and really make actual our commitment to social and economic justice for every single American. And health care is not a commodity, it's a right.
Thank you, Governor Brown. And now we have to pause for a break, and we'll be right back.
My mother-in-law, Margaret, is 78. She'll be 78 this year, and she's been diagnosed as having Alzheimer's for about 10 years. She is totally dependent on us for all her bodily functions.
People at the end of their own lives, I mean in the last 5 or 10 years, often outlive their assets because they have to pay for medical care.
We realize that it's our responsibility to take care of our family. It's just, how could anyone care for her like we can care for her?
In a nursing home, the care would certainly be in excess of $30,000 a year in nearly every state in the Union. For a good nursing home, it would generally be as high as $40,000 a year.
If we had to pay for what we get, we would have to, like I said, we probably wouldn't get it.
Well, people do go broke all the time taking care of people.
I just had a friend the other day call me and asked me if I wanted to go back to work, and I says, look, I says, can you pay me over $9 an hour? Because that's what I have to pay someone to take care of my mother-in-law.
Welcome back, everybody. The first questioner is Nick Bogert of WTVJ of Miami, and his first question will be for Paul Tsongas.
Well, gentlemen, we did a poll, Channel 4 and the Miami Herald, results released about a week ago, asked if your family was hit by an illness or an accident that would require long-term care, what would it mean to your family? But 14% said it wouldn't hurt much, 45% said it might hurt significantly, 41% characterized it as a disaster. Senator Tsongas, your plan for long-term care seems to be a work in progress from what I read of the Tsongas Health for All Americans plan. You say that there should be incentives and they should be considered in the development of such a plan. Do you have a plan, or are you still working on it?
I think the great concern that people have about health care is cost containment. You have to put this thing into effect in such a way that it does not bankrupt the nation. That's why I've ended up adopting the managed competition concept. So my view, very simply, is you start off with universal coverage. Everybody gets it, put that in place, and evolve towards a long-term health care plan. Now, there are some things that have to go in right away. Respite care, home care, the reference was made to it in the video. that should begin now and begin to move in that direction. But I think we have to be very clear that this health care plan has to be put into effect in such a way that it is embraced by people as being reasonable and cost effective, and that's what we're trying to do. The managed competition plan has been endorsed by Time Magazine, Business Week, the New York Times, and that's the concept that I've embraced.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Brown, same question.
My concept is different than Senator Tsongas, because I would like to see one universal plan, one payer, and as part of that, the elderly and long-term care included, so that as we set a budget, whether it's $800 billion or $850 billion, whatever it's going to be, we then, as a nation, democratically determine what our priorities for younger people, for those in middle age, and the elderly, and see it all as a totality. And I would include long-term care. It would be financed through some revenue collection mechanism, and since I support a flat tax, it would be in addition to that in order to finance it. And I would put it all together, all the different ingredients of a national health care policy, and make sure that it can be contained. And the only way it can be contained is if there is one buyer of services and you eliminate the 1,500 for-profit insurance companies as the intermediary.
How do you determine what percentage of that entire package goes for long-term care?
Well, I think that's going to have to be the democratic determination. The Congress would determine that based on needs. And we know one thing, and I saw this as governor, if you make a pot of money available, you will incentivize a great deal of use of that. So the holding down of the costs is going to be the major challenge. But I don't see any way that we can do it unless we have a universal system, and then those with an ability to pay should contribute something in order to make the system fair and financeable.
Governor Clinton.
I think we should finance a long-term care program not only for the elderly but also for disabled persons in our society through expansion of the Medicare program. I think we should begin by taking that portion of Medicaid, which is devoted to long-term care for low-income people, and allow it to become convertible, as we have for 3,000 of our elderly people in Arkansas. So if you become Medicaid eligible, you don't just have to go to a nursing home. You get to decide, or your next kin gets to decide. Do you want home health care? Do you want personal care? Do you want a trip to the senior center? A whole range of services. I would pay for it in the beginning by taking on the cost control issues. Insurance reform, go to broad-based community rating. Have a simplified billing system related to a comprehensive benefit package in the overall health care program. Everybody says if you do this right, you can save between $80 and $100 billion, some of it in the public sector. Put that into long-term care. Begin with respite care and in-home care and build up to a comprehensive system. There would be a copay. It would be limited to a percentage of income, so no one would be too burdened.
All right. Shifting to a question for I believe, Governor Brown now. You, as you said, endorse a single-payer national health insurance plan. Somebody once described what you'd get with that. They claimed that you'd get the warmth of the IRS, you'd get the efficiency of the Postal Service, and the cost containment, cost control of the Pentagon. The New England Journal of Medicine did a survey that showed that only about a fifth of Americans would be willing to pay as much as $200 more in taxes to get that kind of system. What can you provide them for $200 or less? Or is that a reasonable?
Well, have you ever sued an insurance company?
I have not.
Well, you'll find that the post office, however bad it is a lot more friendly. The fact of the matter is that we, as free citizens, can determine what we want to spend on health care. We've done that for the military and for a lot of other things. And I just don't believe that people who try to stigmatize the failures of government want to own up to the fact that there's plenty of failure in this greed, for-profit, a tremendous private enterprise system that is leaving so many people bankrupt and without ability to take care of themselves, having to spend down all their wealth before they're treated like a human being on their way out of life. I mean, it's just immoral. And I believe that we can pay for it. That's the beauty of this flat tax. I've said that we need a universal system of no more than 13%, and whatever it would cost, that would add an additional percentage point to that. I think we can pay for it. As I got back to it at the beginning, it's a matter of what's our commitment. If it's important enough, then we'll take care of our own, or we won't.
Governor Clinton.
I think it would be easier and in the end more cost-effective to go to universal coverage from the employer-based system we have now. And in that sense, Senator Tsongas and I are roughly in agreement on that, I believe. Most people have health insurance in this country, but the costs are out of control. One reason is we don't have a universal system of coverage and a uniform benefit package. The difference is I would mandate national insurance reform, including uniform community rating. There are employer-based systems in Europe which are quite efficient, which provide for a wide range of service, and which control costs. But they have a very different insurance market. You don't have 1,500 health insurance companies and marketing plans and all that. The European system roughly puts 95 cents on the dollar into health care. We put about 84 cents. The difference is $50 to $60 billion that we could save if we had the right kind of system. So I favor an employer-based system, but you must have insurance reform, and you must have some options for the small business community to buy into a public program if the private programs are too expensive.
Senator Simons.
Maybe I can answer the question by telling you how I came to my plan. Last May, I got a group together, including my own doctor, and I said to them, I want you to come up with the best health care plan you can. Look at all the others, but give me your best judgment. There are two criteria. Bring everybody in and don't bankrupt the country. The only two criteria. And they looked at the Canadian system, which was my predilection in the beginning, and ended up coming back 5 months later adopting the managed competition approach. It was their view that if you have competition in the marketplace, that is the only incentive to bring costs down. But there were three conditions to it. One, you change malpractice laws. So you don't have doctors practicing defensive medicine, which is what they do, as you know, today. Secondly, and both of my colleagues have spoken to this, you standardize reporting. So you have uniform standards, the same thing is reported, so the bureaucratic costs come down. I see I'm getting the message. And the final thing is preventive care, and we'll talk about that later.
Okay. We have to take a short commercial break now. We'll be right back with the next round of questions. Thank you.
I think that it's a burden of the health community to educate everybody as to how important health prevention is. I mean, I think what you can do is picture the single mother who's earning $25,000 a year, who's got 3 kids, holds a job, is trying to get daycare, is trying to get food on the table, and to provide a nice home. Okay? Even though she may know that health care is important, survival is more important on a daily basis. And we don't think about health care often until there's a crisis. But health care is society's responsibility. It's often said that giving universal access to everybody to health care costs too much money, and I completely disagree with that. I strongly believe that we need to go into a system where there's one payer of service. That doesn't necessarily have to be the government, but it has to be one payer to really cut down on the administrative costs of the system. Health care should be a right, and getting that kind of preventative care that can keep people healthy is a right. And right now, our society is miserable at supporting that.
Welcome back to our Presidential Health Care Forum. Our next questioner is Tom Fiedler of the Miami Herald, and his first question will be for Governor Brown.
Governor, I'm going to pick right up where Dr. Worm left off on that video. She's talking about a situation that faces countless millions of young mothers in this country, mothers who are perhaps working poor, who $20,000 a year income, and they have to feed children, they have to provide for a household, and what often gets squeezed out of their budgets is the trip to the doctor's office to do preventive care. My question is, for each of you, but you first, is what would your plan do to deal with these millions of mothers and millions of children?
Very simply, I would move from health as a commodity to be traded in for profit to a right on the part of every single citizen of this country. That's what a single-payer system implies and makes available. What we're seeing, we see millions of children that don't have the benefit of, didn't have the benefit of prenatal care or well baby clinics and the whole continuum of health care and prevention and diet and all the rest. And I think that's only going to happen when we're all in the same boat as part of a single-payer system, whereby as a nation we determine the amount and the general categories of emphasis that we're going to make in our national health care system. That's the way children are going to be helped. And I would just point out in this respect, if you look at even things like prevention, smoking and diet are far worse among those with the least income and with lesser years of education. In a universal system, we're going to emphasize the level of prevention and wellness that we bring up the entire health of the nation, beginning with children.
Governor Clinton.
Governor, if I might just ask, Dr. Worm in the video specifically advocates a single-payer system.
I think we're wasting a phenomenal amount of time debating this. Look at the Northern European countries that have different systems. The issue is, if you don't have differential billing, it can be all payer, and you still get the results. I've worked on these problems for years. My wife and I guess, have been involved in them for 20 years, longer than I've been in public life. What you have to do, it depends on not how you pay for it, but what you cover. 6 trips to the doctor for every pregnant woman. Primary and preventive care on the front burner, not the back burner of whatever's covered. Make sure these children are reached in their schools with school-based health services and with neighborhood clinics, easily accessible in rural areas and in inner cities. And finally, do more work in the workplace. A lot of the most unhealthy people in our country, a lot of the mothers and children that have the biggest problems are the children of working mothers who are at very low incomes, who don't have access to Medicaid, who don't have the time to go to the clinic. We need to put more workplace, health education, and primary and preventive work in there. It's not the system of payment, it's what do you cover and how do you reach them.
Senator Saunders.
One thing this administration does not understand, that is prenatal care, preventive care, is not only good humanitarianism, it's good economics. The fact is, if you go in early and give people access to good health care, then you prevent long-term problems down the road. Under my program, what would happen is that in cases where someone was underemployed or unemployed or whatever, the state is a negotiator with the health care provider. So the state is big enough and strong enough to negotiate with the provider. Then each person is given a card which gives them access into that system. And preventive care is a major component. It's not only good health care, but ultimately it's good economics, something the administration, the Bush administration, doesn't seem to understand.
Let me ask you about the single-payer system. You don't advocate that either, and why is your plan perhaps superior to what Governor Brown is suggesting?
Well, not only did my health care group come out against the single payer, because that's sort of where I was leaning towards when I began, but the fact that Time Magazine, the New York Times, and Business Week, who are not presidential candidates, at least I hope not, would endorse the same concept of managed competition means that we ended up with a group that is expert in the field ending up in the same place. That the government mandates the health care, but then you use the marketplace and the competition of that marketplace to cost contain. If you don't cost contain, you've got real problems.
You know, and I'm not going to take my health care policy from Business Week or Time Magazine. These people are in the profit-making business. It's a little different than healing and curing. And the problem in this society is that when you have for-profit insurance companies shooting after people that they hope will never get sick and trying to avoid people who will, you always have the problem of what we have today. If we get over this idea that this is an occasion to get rich, but rather an opportunity for service, for healing, and for caring, then I think we're going to get somewhere.
I agree with that, but look, the reason for that is that we have the most atrocious health insurance system in the world. We have 1,500 separate companies with marketing plans and billing systems with massive administrative costs, and only 84 cents on the dollar goes to health care. But there are employer-based, all-payer systems in Europe where 95 cents on the dollar goes to health care. It is not the payer system. It is that we have refused to do things like mandate community ratings so insurance companies make money the way grocery stores do. A little bit of money on a lot of people instead of trying to insure groups of 50, 25-year-old women who spend 4 hours a day at the gym, which is what they're doing here. That's why you've got all this waste. But it's what do you cover and how do you reach the people? That is the fundamental issue.
Could I just make one point?
Can you give us a quick one?
I just want to make it clear that under the plan that we are proposing, no pre-existing condition can limit you. Because when I was diagnosed as having cancer, when I left the Senate, I would not, one of my worries was, can I get health insurance? Can I get life insurance? So under my program, no pre-existing condition is a detriment to coverage.
I got to say 2 points about Europe. 2 quick points. Number one, in Europe, 60% of the working people are in trade unions who have a major impact on the government, and they protect their workers in a way that doesn't happen here. And number two, in Europe, the government or the politicians don't get $10 million every 2 years from insurance companies to keep them under control and doing what they like rather than what the people need.
Can you pick up to Senator Tsongas?
That's what we're having an election for.
Senator, you said in your opening comments that you regretted that President Bush wasn't here or Pat Buchanan wasn't here to talk about their health plan. Assuming you become the nominee, and each of you can assume that for each other, why is this a cynical plan that President Bush has proposed? What is it about it that won't work, or what may work about it?
What happened was President Bush wanted to give his State of the Union message and use the magic words, health care, in a way he knew would never get passed. So how did they do it? Tax credits. We may disagree here, but none of us argue that a tax credit approach works. The tax credit approach means that I give you a tax credit and you now negotiate with the provider. You got to be kidding. No one believes that. That was an attempt to put health care into the State of the Union message without the substance that most people can agree to. Whatever differences there may be here, the tax credit approach is non-viable, and no one, all the experts, all the people involved with this issue, no one has come down on the side of tax credits. So that's why it's very clear to those of us who have worked in this field for these last several months that a tax credit approach was a ruse, and that's what he did.
Governor Clinton is next.
Let me try to explain specifically what's wrong with it. You give poor people who are working poor who don't have health insurance, or people that work for small business, between a $2,000 and a $3,750 tax credit. You pay for it by holding down the cost of Medicaid and Medicare under the Bush proposal. Okay, well, what happens? What happens? The people go out and takes a tax credit, which means the taxpayers pay for it 100%. You put that money into the same bankrupt system, no cost controls on insurance, no cost controls on drugs, no uniform billing system, no cost controls on bureaucracy. The system explodes. Meanwhile, you cut coverage for poor people through Medicare and Medicaid. Fewer doctors cover them. They're uncovered, so all their costs are loaded onto all the rest of us who have insurance. And the thing gets worse. It'll make the problem worse, not better. It is so cynical.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And we now have to take a commercial break, and we will be right back. Thanks very much.
Van is a mobile medical unit which travels to various locations throughout Broward County, providing primary health care to indigent elderly.
We have practically a complete doctor's office on wheels.
Over the past year, our volunteers have given over 5,000 hours of service.
The husband dies and the woman is by herself, or vice versa, and they are in pretty bad shape.
It's a big problem. It's many of these people don't have families. They have families that are disinterested. They're alone, and they don't know where to turn. Medicare is available. We do have some patients who do have Medicare insurance, but it's not enough. These people who have low incomes or are indigent don't have the money to put out to see a physician in the beginning. And doctors don't want to wait for Medicare to pay.
We are the richest country in the world, and we should provide the best medical care, not only to the people who can afford it, but to people who cannot afford it either.
Welcome back, everybody. I want to give Governor Brown a chance to respond to the last point in the last segment. So, Governor Brown.
Yeah, what I don't like about the president's program, it's one of these schemes of health care with people without money, those with just a little bit of money, really getting the short end, being neglected, being isolated. And I want to have a shift. The whole basis of my campaign is to shift the whole way we think about this country and putting everyone in the same boat from the point of view of a single payer, with the president and someone who's homeless, depending on the same health care system, would guarantee that we do get caring health care for all.
Dr. Stuart Altman, the next question will be to Governor Clinton.
Governor Clinton, that video that we just saw underlies one of the approaches that some people suggest. They say that we're making too much of this health care problem for the uninsured. Really, what we should be doing is providing extra funds to hospitals and doctors, and then they could do what they do best rather than having any kind of a massive system, whether it's through the government or through private insurance. Do you believe that we could, from the ground up, provide funds to hospitals and doctors and that would be enough?
No. No, and I'm all for that. I believe in things like mobile clinics and healthcare services in schools and in rural areas. I've fought hard for those things. I visited a clinic in an inner city area in this community. Those are important. But look, it won't solve the AIDS crisis. See the man holding it? It won't give you the money you need to provide long-term care for the elderly and the disabled. And you'll keep wasting money. There's $100 billion of inexcusable, unrelated to health care costs in this system through insurance inefficiencies, exorbitant drug pricing, unnecessary medical technology, procedures that shouldn't be performed, and wildly overinflated bureaucracy costs caused by the billing problems and by the way the government regulates health care. So you can't just give a little more money and fix it. You've got to restructure the system. You'll never get there if you don't.
Senator Sanders. Do you believe by simply providing purchasing power, we can be assured that there'd be enough health care services throughout this country so that everyone would have equal access to quality care? Or will we invariably need to sort of match it in some way?
Well, you're going to have to match because you don't have the same situations every place. But the fact is that health care has to be gotten a handle on. And the approach that we're using is let the government mandate it. It's a basic human American right, period. Then go on and create your program. Now, the notion that you can simply give more money to a doctor or to a hospital, and that's going to solve the problem, is absurd. I mean, that's just more of the old program. If you talk about cutting costs by standardizing reporting and outcomes, that means that someone has to come in above that and say, these are the forms that you're going to be using. So I really don't have faith that simply throwing more money at existing institutions is going to solve the problem. And I will say, finally, if I sound like a broken record, as long as George Bush is President of the United States, there's not going to be a health care program for Americans.
Following the same thing, Governor Brown, it's been said that if the government would take full responsibility for all of our spending in health care, they would be allocating funds differently. Others suggest, however, by moving money away from some of our high-tech, tertiary care facilities, we actually could be negatively affecting the quality of care. Do you agree with something like that?
I believe that this is a matter for people to decide through their elected representatives. And this overemphasis on high-tech medicine is a function of the enormous profits to be made in that line of work. That's what's happening. And I am confident that if we can clean up this system, and by clean up I mean limit the contributions to $100 so these people who are now peddling their influence can no longer inject their poison into the political process, I believe we can control costs in such a way that we can deliver basic health care in a human way. Because this is the only country where we're paying more, living less, and having one of the highest infant mortality rates. It goes back to a fundamental point. The social and economic injustice. Unless we can do something about that, we're always going to be picking up the pieces in an inadequate medical care system.
Could I respond to that? If I could, when we talk about high-tech medicine, I'm it. All right? This is me, okay? That when I was diagnosed with cancer, and they realized they could not treat me, that my mortality was certain, I had the chance to be a guinea pig and go into a bone marrow transplant program. I was one of the first 50 to do that. I'm high tech, okay? I'm alive, all right? And I want what was available to me. So, you know, to simply write it off as criticizing various private sectors, the fact is that there are people today who have cancer, were being treated by the bone marrow transplant and surviving because there was the capacity to reach out and do the high-tech research. So let's not knock what keeps some of us alive today and breathing.
Yeah, let's not knock
Governor Clinton.
but let's not also neglect the fact that
Governor Clinton is next.
We're spending more money creating cancer than we are curing it in this country.
That's right. Remember that.
Go ahead.
This is the wrong debate. This is the wrong debate. I was with a 3 or 4 year old boy this morning in Louisiana who's got cancer, and he may make it too because he got high-tech treatment. He has access to a good hospital, a well-to-do grandfather, and I think he's going to make it. This is a false choice. I mean, in New Hampshire, we met elderly people who were on Medicare, not poor enough to be on Medicaid, who didn't have food because they couldn't pay their drug bills. Now, what the problem is we have underemphasized and over-rationed primary and preventive care for everybody from pregnant women to elderly people, so that we still pay for some people to get high-tech medicine. We can keep doing that and save money if we take out the insurance waste, the bureaucratic waste, the government-induced waste, and front-load this money and take care of people. It's a false choice.
Governor Brown.
You know, with all due respect to that litany of points, I don't think they're possible in just a marginal change to the existing system. It takes a more fundamental shift, a single payer that will enable this country to democratically determine the balance between high-tech, basic care, and long-term care. They're all important, but right now we're neglecting millions and millions of people with the most elementary basic care. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you got your high-tech care, and I don't want anyone to be denied, but I'm also worried about the millions of little kids who are just not getting a start in life because we have this for-profit, greed-driven system that needs a fundamental shift, and that's what a single-payer system does.
Okay, gentlemen, it's terrible. We have to go to a commercial break right now, and it was just really getting good, but we will be back in a moment. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to have now our closing statements. There'll be 2 minutes each. First will be Senator Tsongas, then Governor Brown, then Governor Clinton. Senator Tsongas.
Thank you very much. And let me thank the participants for putting on this program. Health care must be seen in this election as a basic human right of all Americans. It's that simple. As a cancer survivor, I feel very strongly that everyone who's out there should have the same access to health care that was available to me. The program that I have adopted is called Managed Competition. It's really quite simple. It says the government mandates that every American has a right to health care, period, and then has the private sector come in and compete to bring down the costs. The Managed Competition idea is not mine. It's been around for some time. It's been endorsed by, as I said earlier, Time Magazine, the New York Times, and Business Week, a broad spectrum of different kinds of publications. Let me say, more importantly, whatever differences may exist here among the Democrats, it should be very clear to any American who cares about health care that as long as George Bush is President of the United States, there will be no health care. And the program that he put forth in the State of the Union message is supported by no one who's a serious player in health care discussions. The Democratic Party has been caring about this issue for a long, long time. And now, thanks to the work of Senator Kennedy, Senator Rockefeller, Senator Kerry, it's now front stage, and it's going to be enacted next year. That can only happen if there's a Democratic president committed to health care who has a sense for the needs of the American people. So let me conclude by reiterating my challenge to President Bush. Mr. Bush, join us. Come sit with us and sit here and explain why your health care program should be given any credit. Come join us, sir.
Thank you, Senator Tsongas. We now turn to Governor Brown for his closing statement.
We like to call this campaign an insurgent campaign because we're challenging the myths and the comfortable assumptions of the status quo. And one of those most comfortable assumptions is that with just a little bit of change, a marginal adjustment, somehow we're going to deal with the real problems of this society. I think the pathology is too deep, and that pathology is expressing itself in actual physical illness, and it stems from the growing inequality and impoverishment and difficulty that tens of millions of Americans find themselves. That's why whenever we offer a change, often it's so rhetorical and so empty and meaningless because the power is not there to bring it about. That's why I referenced the fact that President Truman called for the same thing that all of us are calling for now, but nothing happened. We must challenge the power of those whose power it is that controls the Congress. That's why I've made such a big thing about contributions and politics. My goal is to shift the focus and philosophy of our society from competition in the healthcare field to caring, from treating health as a commodity to recognizing it as a right of all Americans. And that's why I say a single-payer system with a democratically determined total amount that we spend, and then spend it as wisely as we can. There's so many things that we know now. I visited a clinic at Tufts where they're showing that elderly people can delay the onset of disabilities by exercise and nutrition and various other techniques. But that's not available to most people, and certainly not available to people with low income. I want a system that is universal, that is all-encompassing, and that is as good and as generous as the people of this country. It's done in Europe, it's done in Japan, and I believe we can do it here if we just crack the stranglehold of those people that control it.
Thank you, Governor Brown. We now turn to Governor Clinton for his closing statement.
This is not just a problem of coverage, it's a preeminent problem of cost. It's not simply a health care problem, it's a massive economic problem. We're spending 13% of our income on health care, and yet here in Florida, 2.3 million people have no insurance. 30% of the uninsured are children. 1 in 4 non-whites are uninsured. 1 in 3 Hispanics are uninsured. And the elderly who do have Medicare are now spending a higher percentage of their income on health care than they were before 1965 when Medicare came in. Why? Because we have stubbornly refused to do what every other advanced nation has done and provide a system of uniform health care for all of our people as a right. We have to do that by taking on the health insurance bureaucracies, the drug companies, which you haven't had time to talk about tonight, that are raising prices at 3 times the rate of inflation and often charging people overseas less money for our drugs than we pay. We have to have a system that emphasizes long-term care for the elderly and the disabled, primary and preventive care, and more choices for all people as well as access. This is a terrific human problem. The good news is that for the first time in American history, every candidate for the Democratic nomination is committed to doing something about it. We have different ideas. I think mine are better. They think theirs are better. But one thing is for sure, if you don't vote for us, and if you don't vote to change the direction of this country, you will not get national health reform. And without it, we'll be sicker, we'll be worse. The country will continue to come apart, and eventually it will bankrupt America and rob us of our greatness. We can do better. Help us do it.
Thank you very much, Governor Clinton. I want to thank Governor Clinton and Senator Tsongas and Governor Brown. I think there's been a terrific debate focused entirely on health care. I want to thank our audience. I want to particularly thank our special sponsors. That's all the time we have, folks. Thanks a lot for watching. Good night. Thanks, Phil.
We have this programming note for you. The preceding Democratic Presidential Candidates Forum on the subject of health care will be seen again later tonight, beginning at 12:55 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 9:55 p.m. Pacific Time. In just a few moments, a look at Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, was established by the Residence Act, passed in Congress on July 16, 1790. The act provided for a district of territory not exceeding 10 miles square to be located as hereafter directed on the River Potomac.
It took many years to decide where to put this capital. It was very controversial. Of course, it was a sectional dispute. The North wanted the capital in the North, the South wanted the capital in the South. So it was a result of a political compromise, actually, probably the first political compromise of many in the District of Columbia.
The specific site was selected by President George Washington.
It certainly was open space, not developed at all. George Washington, though, had something in mind when he chose this site. He recognized the potential of the Potomac River for trade with the West. The Potomac went the farthest of any of the eastern rivers towards the Ohio River Valley. So he dreamed of a canal, which eventually became the C&O Canal, that would make this city a commercial center as well as a political center. Never happened, never worked out. But in fact, he had that in mind. And it was a beautiful place, too, I think. It had heights and quite a bit of natural beauty as well.
The land that Washington chose was owned by approximately 19 landowners. Most of this land consisted of small farms and plantations. Virginia and Maryland offered the land to the federal government, and the landowners subsequently sold their portions of land for the building of the capital city.
Total was 100 square miles, I believe, and Virginia's share was about a third of that. I believe 63 square miles of that belonged to Maryland, and of course that's the part that's left because Virginia, that section seceded back.
1 year after the Residence Act, Washington appointed Pierre L'Enfant, a fellow Revolutionary War soldier, to design the capital city. L'Enfant was later dismissed because he quarreled with President Washington. He was replaced by a surveyor named Andrew Ellicott, who closely followed L'Enfant's plan. In the 10 years that followed the Residence Act, the government worked out of Philadelphia while a three-man commission oversaw the development of Washington, D.C. In May of 1800, President John Adams and his wife Abigail moved into the White House. 6 months later, in November, the second session of the 6th Congress convened in the newly constructed Capitol building. The War of 1812 greatly hindered the development of the capital city.
It was devastating. The British came right in and burned all of the federal buildings except for the Patent Office, which was personally saved by William Thornton, the story goes, who stood in front of it and said, "Do not desecrate this building where all the patents were held." But the White House was burned, the Capitol, and in fact, this was one time among several in the 19th century when people wondered whether the Capitol should even remain in Washington.
Congress, which was not in session when the British attacked, called a special session to consider temporarily moving the capital to a safer location. Many suspected, however, that a temporary move might become permanent. To prevent this, Washington bankers loaned the federal government $500,000 for the rebuilding of federal buildings. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate accepted the loan, and the capital remained in Washington, D.C. During the Civil War, a fort was built around the city to protect it from soldiers in Virginia and Maryland. Virginia at the time was a Confederate state. Maryland supported the Union, but some felt that it could easily turn Confederate. Only one Civil War battle was actually fought in Washington, D.C. However, many wounded soldiers were brought into the city, and many government buildings were converted to hospitals.
Indeed, this is the first time, I think, that the federal government, the Union, realized it needed a strong city, a symbolic city, to represent the strength of the nation. People thronged to Washington, not only soldiers, but businessmen who were doing contracts for the federal government, journalists for the first time covering the news in the federal capital, considered important for the first time. So I think that the Civil War was a watershed.
After the Civil War, the city of Washington, D.C. grew. The dome of the Capitol, begun in 1856, was completed in 1865. The Washington Monument, begun in 1848, was finished in 1884. The State, War, and Navy Building, now called the Old Executive Office Building, was begun in 1871 and completed in 1888. And the Lincoln Memorial was begun in 1915, finished in 1922. Because Washington, D.C. is a federal city, not belonging to any state, it's run by both the U.S. Congress and members of the local government. The U.S. Constitution grants Congress the right to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. Over the years, a number of governing methods have been practiced. Each form of government has displayed varying levels of congressional involvement and local autonomy. Between the years 1802 and 1871, Washington, D.C. was governed by a mayor-council form of government. From 1871 to 1874, the district was governed by a territorial government. A commission government was established in 1874 and lasted until 1967. Between the years 1967 and 1974, the district was governed by a commissioner-council form of government. And in December of 1973, President Nixon signed a bill granting the District of Columbia limited home rule. Limited home rule allows district citizens to elect their own mayor and council. Residents of Washington, D.C. are represented in the U.S. House of Representatives by one non-voting delegate and have the right to vote in presidential elections. Washington, D.C. residents do not have any representation in the Senate. The Congress makes annual payments to the district local government and sets the rates of these annual payments. The local government cannot tax federal property and cannot annul any act of Congress which pertains to the district. It has been over 200 years since Congress passed the Residence Act of 1790. What was once farmland has evolved into a capital city, housing about 600,000 residents.
C-SPAN is your primary source for election coverage. To get the most from our programming about the presidential campaign, C-SPAN offers Race to the Nomination, a new publication written by the editors of Congressional Quarterly. Race to the Nomination gives you an informed look at the presidential nomination process. You'll see the voting patterns, special rules, current political conditions, and key demographics state by state. To order with Visa or MasterCard, call toll-free 1-800-854-9043 or send a check or money order for $11.95 to CQ Books Order Department, Post Office Box 7816, 300 Raritan Center Parkway, Edison, New Jersey. The zip code is 08818. We were joined Friday morning in a viewer call-in program by three Washington-based reporters: Walter Pincus of the Washington Post, Jill Abramson of the Wall Street Journal, and James Glassman, editor of the Capitol Hill newspaper Roll Call. Our guests examined a variety of issues, including presidential politics,
Jim Glassman, editor of Roll Call. What kind of a week was it on Capitol Hill?
Well, I guess I've been on the Hill for probably 5 years, and I've never seen a week like this. We had a very difficult time.